I brought my family to South Australia in 2007. I wanted it to be a place where we could live and work and learn, and for my kids to be in the schools in South Australia. And in fact, I was really struck by this, in fact, over the last couple of years, with the work that I've been doing with UNESCO in Bangkok. And what they've been doing there is they've been looking at they call it Education Beyond 2015. 2015 is a really big turning point for UNESCO because it's when the Millennium Development Goals run out. And so when 2015 comes along, you've got to say, okay, so what is our vision of education in the future beyond 2015? And the 2012 meeting in Bangkok really captured some of the things that we've already been talking about. In fact, I think we've been talking about a lot in South Australia. That balance between academic skills, but they were seeing in the Asia-Pacific region that perhaps there'd been too much of a focus on the accumulation of academic skills, and that really we were starting to think about, well, there's these kind of more elusive, difficult to define, transversal competencies. What are the things, not that transfer from one thing to another, but what are the skills, the characteristics, the capacities that actually help young people to be effective learners, to be effective performers? What are the things that underpin their learning? What are those sorts of things? And we spent a long time trying to figure out what they were, and in fact, just looking back at my notes, and when Uncle Lewis this morning talked about NINDY, I thought, that's it. That's with the piece of string, that's it. It's not about the piece of string. It's about the deep observation. And deep observation, I would think of as being a transversal skill, that thing that underpins our success. They went on in 2012 to say, well, okay, so these kind of competencies will include things like communication, innovative thinking, respect, teamwork, problem solving. And you can start to see, I started to see, that this was our way of interpreting the Australian curriculum. This is the South Australian making the curriculum work for us. This is our grasping the curriculum and saying, okay, well, yes, we've definitely got the content, and we're not going to devalue the content, but there are these other things as well. And again, UNESCO in the Asia-Pacific region went on to say in 2012, it's this stuff that actually prepares young people for the world of work. But this is the stuff as well that helps them to make their lives meaningful, sustainable, and responsible, whether that's their future lives or their current lives as young people. This is the empowering stuff that helps them to use that knowledge and know-how that they gain from school and from education in really effective ways to empower them, whether they're a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old, or it's about preparing them for that future. And so, from across the region, so we have people from lots of different countries saying, okay, so what are we going to do about this? Because what else is going on around the world? And we were really influenced by things like this from MIT in the States, saying, okay, we can start to see, certainly this was in engineering education, they were starting to see, well, we can see this shift. We can see this shift, from pre-World War II through to today, where we've come almost right over into this corner where knowledge has been worth everything. And now what we're seeing is that we're kind of shifting back to this rebalancing. Everybody's struggling with this rebalancing. And again, I like this picture because it's not an either or. It's about where does the balance lie. It's about saying, if we had our way, if we were empowered, if we were to take the strategic lead, what would our balance be? And everybody's balance is going to be in slightly different places. We've also been struck by this research. This might be something that you're familiar with. This is a few years old now, and again, it comes from MIT. And what they did was they took their engineers again and they said, okay, so the stuff that you learned, the stuff that's important for your job, where did you learn it? And so I know you can't read all of these, but over on that left-hand side, that first bank of things, that's really the knowledge and know-how stuff. That's the thermodynamics, that's the mechanical systems, that's engineering, processing, manufacturing, and so on. And what we see is in the colours is that the light purple at the bottom is, I learnt that as an undergraduate. The dark red, maroony colour, that's I learnt that at graduate school. The yellow says I learned that on the job. The pale blue says I learned that somewhere else. And the dark purple at the top said, well, I just didn't learn that. I haven't got that. And what you see is, of course, that the knowledge and know-how is completely dominated by that pale blue, the undergraduate. I learned that as an undergraduate. I learned that at school. If we go on to those middle characteristics, where did you learn these things? These really, I think, are the transversal skills. So you might be able to see the communications and teamwork. We've got systems thinking. We've got problem solving. We've got knowledge discovery all those things that, perhaps are not really focused on engineering, but are those transversal skills that underpin a whole host of things, like the NINDY, like the string that Uncle Lewis talked about. And then on the right-hand side here, what we've got are the professional skills. So things like marketing, development, understanding the business context in which we're working. And so you can see there that there's lots of yellow. I learned a lot of that on the job. So we can see that a few years ago, engineers at MIT, what they were saying was, yes, I learned a lot of the knowledge and know-how at school, and then we kind of tail off into other aspects of the professional development, the professional empowerment. But I don't think this graph's very interesting. I think the next one's the most interesting, because what they did then was they said, okay, so how often do you use those things in your job? And what you see here on the left-hand side is the scale going up from never at the bottom to hardly ever, occasionally, regularly, frequently, and pervasively every day. And now what you see is a complete change, of course, in that balance, where the knowledge and know-how is necessary, but clearly not sufficient. Nowhere near sufficient for the professional empowerment, for that professional preparation. Because it's those transversal skills that really come through. The problem solving, the attitudinal stuff, the independent thinking, the communication, the teamwork. And while the professional skills over on the right-hand side are also important, what we're seeing is that time and time again, whenever we do activities like this, it's those transversal skills that stand out. So we've already seen this kind of rebalancing going on. And I think it was interesting the way that universities like MIT responded, because if you look at the implications of that, so one implication that we've been talking quite a lot about and continue to talk about are MOOCs, these really big open online courses. Because what's going on with the MOOCs, of course, is that universities like MIT and Harvard and others are giving away their content, because they know that their content is the least valuable thing that they've got to offer. And so the content becomes necessary, but it's not where the value lays. So they're giving away the content in things like MOOCs, and what they're focusing on is using the transversal skills to take that knowledge and know-how and actually make it empowering to young people, actually make it so that they can use that knowledge and know-how in really effective ways. And so it's been things like this that have really influenced our thinking, or at least UNESCO's thinking, in Bangkok, across the Asia-Pacific region, on what education is going to look like in the future in that region. And there were case studies presented from all of the countries that I've put on the list here. And we did one for Australia as well, and I just want to show you a little bit of data from that in a second. But just to give you one example, Japan was one example of one place. And in Japan, they've got this policy of the zest for living. And the core parts of this zest for living are exactly as we were talking about in UNESCO, this balance between the acquisition of knowledge and skills and things like, so these are their words, a sense of judgment and critical thinking, a shift to a need for coping with rapidly changing environments, and that idea of a knowledge-based society. So the kind of old industrial models are not enough. So we've got to enact this shift. Again, their words talking about this strengthening of our students' abilities to think and express and make decisions. Still with that knowledge and know-how, but strengthening, going beyond that, getting these transversal skills going. And then they've gone into some detail. They say, well, this is what our curriculum would look like. This is what our curriculum would look like if we were to put this in action. And we can see some of those things repeated here about helping students, fostering abilities to make decisions, about they've got a moral values education piece in there that I think's interesting. You wonder how they're going to do it, how they're going to get that going. Yes, they've got maths and science in there, and they've got some things about experience-based learning opportunities. But even within the list of things that they say they're going to do, yes, they're going to say there's going to be some mandated hours for literacy, numeracy, and science. But they keep coming back to this balance between skills, knowledge and skills, and this sense of judgment and critical thinking. And the last point in the Japanese case study that was interesting was to say that this core policy that they're running with in Japan, one of the key components is this collaboration between schools, collaboration between families and schools, communities, getting the whole thing to work together. Jane talked about that collaborative effort and that collective will. And places like Japan and other places, I'm just sure this is one example, other places around the Asia-Pacific region, they're all saying, this is the future, this is our future, this is where we want to go. But for me, what was particularly interesting about it was that everyone was saying, this is what we want to do, this is our policy, this is where we want to go. And so by stepping out of South Australia and going to Bangkok and talking to colleagues and decision makers from across the Asia-Pacific region, I was looking back on South Australia thinking, we do this. We're already doing this. We're already enacting this. If you look at the way that we are looking at things like the Australian curriculum, when it first came along, we were looking at it from a content point of view. But now, we're doing all the things that you're saying you want to do. When you look at things like the early years learning framework, that's not just South Australia leading Australia. That's South Australia leading the region, if not the world. When I share those sorts of documents with colleagues and say, but you need to look at it this way, because this is the way that we're looking at it in South Australia, they're absolutely blown away by it. So I think all the things that Tony and Jane have been saying today, I absolutely agree with, and that story, and that developing story, and that future story for us, I think is really important. But I think we can also kind of step out and look back and say, but we're already doing this to some extent. If I look at things, when I share with colleagues, the SACE, for instance, where the SACE is, where we're using the performance standards, where we've adopted the Australian curriculum general capabilities. And we're just starting on that journey, really. Again, colleagues in the Asia-Pacific region are absolutely blown away. And the research project absolutely floors them, because they're all saying, this is what we need. This is what we need back in our country. Can we come and visit? Exactly as Tony was saying before. People now saying, I want to come to South Australia and see what you're doing, because I need to bring that back to my country. Both researchers, educators, and policymakers say that that's what we want to do. And again, I think that just, I'm flipping out of academic now, I think back to parent. When I look at what brought me to South Australia, when I first visited South Australia in 2000, and we came to live here in 2007, it must have been the year before, but perhaps a little bit before that. When I first came here, that's what I saw. When I first came here, I visited a number of schools. I remember visiting Gary Costello down in Mount Gambier, went to Bridgewater Primary School and chatting with Rosalind there and with Ian Love, and I saw Ian on Friday. I think I can see Ian over the back there as well. Morning, Ian. And talking with educators in South Australia, the scholarship, that strategic approach, that intentionality that I saw in teachers in South Australia was so different to what I was seeing with my own kids' education back in the UK. And now, being here and working with schools and with clusters and the old regions, and now with the kind of nascent building partnerships, I can see the same things going on. That intentionality that I saw that I wanted for my kids. So we came to South Australia in 2007. My youngest is still at Bridgewater Primary School. My eldest is at Bray Agricultural High School. I'm sure Wal's here as well. Morning, Wal. And that's because Charlie is a kid who likes his agriculture, really loves his agriculture, still doing it in year 11. And they'd be at Heathfield, which is our local high school if they weren't there. And the reason for sharing that with you is because from a system point of view, when I step back and look at it from the Asia-Pacific region, I can see in South Australia that we're already doing these things. And from a parent's point of view, when I step back and think about these underpinning skills, these skills that we're saying right around the world are the skills that are really important and need a strategic approach from our educators. I can see it in our schools in South Australia, the schools I visit and the schools that my kids are in. I want to take a moment, and this morning you've heard, some of the South Australian story from me, how I've seen it, where I've stepped out of South Australia. You've heard from Tony, you've heard from Jane. And rather than just me keep talking, I think we're just going to stop for a few minutes and give you some time at your tables, maybe just 5 minutes at the tables to talk about your reflections on what you've heard this morning and what it means to you. Over to you, just for 5 minutes. Picking back up on the story and where I was, I think, with lots of the changes that are going on, this isn't about saying, we've got to stop doing this and start doing this so much, I don't think. As saying, the world's changing, people are responding to that change in different ways, and we've got to find our way of responding that. We've got to find that story. And as I say, my experience in South Australia has been that we are responding, but we're always changing and we're always developing, and keeping with that story, I think's been really powerful. And when we did the case study for Australia, for UNESCO, to say, well, what's going on in Australia? And I'll zoom in on some of this so you can actually read it. One of the questions that we asked educators and education leaders were, well, what do you think is important? What do you think are the important skills that are important to develop in your students? And what we saw coming out on top were those characteristics of problem solving and communication and perseverance. You can see there those things that were coming through. And I don't think you'd be surprised by any of that data. But one of the things that we found really interesting from this was when we asked educators, so what support do you need? What does it look like to develop these so-called non-cognitive skills, these transversal underpinning skills? I don't like the term non-cognitive. Because I think it's the opposite. I think communication and teamwork and those things actually take quite a lot of cognitive input. But it's a term that's come historically that we've got. And this is what the educators said. Now, what you can see on this chart is that the blue line was the 100 teachers that responded to this survey that we did in South Australia. So the 100 teachers that responded. But we picked out and reported separately on a group of teachers who were representing a project that we were doing with the Eastern region, as it happened, last year, the year before, on graduate qualities. And in the Eastern region, we were thinking about graduate qualities, and the teachers and leaders had picked up this idea of these transversal skills, perhaps being represented through the general capabilities in the Australian curriculum. But that needed to be a real focus. If our students graduate without those qualities, then we're not necessarily setting them up for that kind of empowered future. And so the differences between those teachers and the teachers and the general population I thought was really interesting. Because as you can see there, what teachers were asking for, that top bar, was more support, learning materials and more support. And then the next thing that people were saying was, well, we need time to share our expertise. As Jane said, that collaborative effort and collective will. We need to be able to put that together to share information about what we're doing and what's working and what's not working. And then they talked about formal professional learning and then clearer guidelines. So tell us what to do. Tell us what the guidelines are. And what was interesting was that the teachers who had stepped into this, the educators who had stepped into this and got past that hump of, I'm not really sure what this looks like, I don't really know what this means, but I'm willing to take a step into it and start to think about it some more, start to be purposeful and strategic about it. You can see those grey lines then shifted. And the tell us what to do, give us the guidelines, dropped right back. And what came up out of that was the information sharing amongst teachers. Once they got past the kind of initial response that might say, oh, I don't want to go here, just tell me what to do. Once they got past that, what they wanted was time to collaborate, time to develop this together and move forward together as a profession. And I thought that was really striking, and that generated quite a lot of conversation in UNESCO at Bangkok. And the other thing that we put in our report was to say that this isn't a kind of, we can't see this as a fragmented story. This is a story that goes from the early years learning framework through into the Australian curriculum, and in South Australia, it goes through into the SACE as well. And we used things like the general capabilities just to illustrate that point. We also talked a lot about in the Australian curriculum, those things that are not limited to individual year groups, like the proficiencies in the mathematics, like the history concepts and the geography concepts. Those of you that have worked with us on this, those kind of essential elements, those core bits, those parts of the curriculum that reflect our educational values. And when we say, what's this thing really for? What's the point of teaching kids maths? What's the point of teaching kids the history or geography? When the kids say to us, why are we learning trigonometry? And you go, so you can calculate this angle? No, of course that's not it. That might be a little part of it. But the why question now, we've got a clear answer to. And this is it. It's your development as a learner, that your performance, your academic performance is reflecting your development as a learner, your development in terms of being a problem solver in the maths proficiencies, being able to see history stories and to see the cause and effect, to see the different perspectives in it, in the geography stories and the geography analysis, being able to see the connectedness and the spatial connectedness that's going on there. And so this story about how these were all responsible for the development of all these things through from the early years learning framework, through into the Australian curriculum, and then through into the SACE in South Australia, are actually really well matched by where UNESCO are going in terms of that future of education for the Asia-Pacific region. And I think, again, in South Australia, we are starting on this journey of making sure that these things are working together so that our kids are empowered and our kids' performance does develop out of that shared story. So that we're thinking about our kids as problem solvers, how they're developing as problem solvers, not to what extent can they solve some problems. Are they mechanistic problem solvers? But they are actually developing as problem solvers. They've got this transversal skill as problem solvers. And it was really tricky for us when we got going on this with this UNESCO team, because we were all over the place. So these are the people that did on this chart here. These are the people that did case studies plus the Australian case study. But there were people from China and obviously Thailand and Bangladesh and countries all over the Asia-Pacific region, right through to Kazakhstan in the west. And the guy from Kazakhstan, when I was talking to him, we were saying, this is okay, and I really think that these transversal skills are important. But I still want kids to be able to look after their sheep. And you think, we've all got that. I still want my kids to be able to do this thing, to have this skill, to have this knowledge, to have this know-how. And it looked then at the time, on the face of it, that we were dealing with the Bangkok telephone system. That it was just a mess, that you just couldn't see any way through it, that it was just this tangle of, sheep over here and something else over there and industry over here, and it just looked like a complete mess. And then I realized what I was doing. I was falling for that problem where I was doing fast thinking. That what I was doing was, I wasn't doing the thing that I always talk about, which is the stop and think. I was looking at all these people that looked so different from me in terms of where they were coming from with the sheep and everything else, and going, this will never work. We'll never get anything out of this. How are we going to strategically find what we want to do together when we've got all these different things, when we're coming at it from different perspectives? When there's some people saying, we've just done a great piece on getting our proportion of girls finishing primary school or finishing high school up to 50%. That's where they were, and then we were thinking about it in other ways. It just seemed like a mess. And so I needed to stop and think about my own thinking. And I just wanted to share with you a quick video clip that outlines some of the ways in which, when we fall for fast thinking and we don't go for slower thinking, when we don't go for that stop and think, how it really changes the potential for our outcomes and really can change the decisions that we make.
You may not realize it, but your brain actually processes information in two very distinct ways. Like when you look at this photo, you instantly know she has blonde hair, is visibly angry, and likely has some choice words to yell. Without any effort, you experienced fast thinking. But if you look at the following problem, something different happens. Sure, you immediately know it's a multiplication problem, and you knew you could solve it if you had the energy, but didn't. If you do try, your muscles will tense, your pupils will dilate, and your heart rate will increase. Now, you've experienced slow thinking. These two systems of fast and slow thinking dictate much of our perception and reaction in life. Take these lines, for example. It's clear that they're different lengths, but if you measure them, they're actually the exact same length. Even now that you know, System 1, or your fast thinking, can't stop seeing the illusion because it acts automatically. A similar effect is seen here. Which figure is the largest? Again, they're all the same size, but the suggestion of perspective and depth causes your System 1 to interpret the picture as three-dimensional, even though it's on a flat two-dimensional surface. It's making quick work of the available information, and so your conscious System 2, or slow thinking, must compensate after the fact and choose not to believe your intuition or instinct. Want to see your System 2 in action? I'll show you a string of 4 digits, you read them aloud, then add 1 to each of the original digits. If the card reads 3795, the correct response would be 4806. We'll then go to the next card and you'll do the same, followed by the next card. Ready? Go. Few people can cope with more than 4 digits, but even harder is add 3. The interesting bit is that though your pupils would have dilated, you often become effectively blind when you fully engage System 2. Did you notice the color of the text change? Or how about the fact that the numbers completely changed when I put them off to the side? Listen to the following puzzle. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Chances are your System 1 intuition was yelling 10 cents, but this appealing System 1 answer we know is wrong. In fact, the correct answer is 5 cents. Even if you worked out the correct answer, you likely thought of 10 cents along the way. System 1 is trying to work out an answer as quickly and seamlessly as possible, which is extremely beneficial in everyday life. If every activity required full mental effort, it would be exhausting. But knowing this allows us to understand that not all of our first impressions are correct. How many animals of each kind did Moses take into the ark? So few people detect what is wrong with this question that it's been dubbed the Moses illusion. In fact, Moses took no animals, Noah did. Again, our brain invests as little resources as necessary so that things run quickly and smoothly. Because Moses is not abnormal in the biblical context, System 1 unconsciously detects an association between Moses and ark and quickly accepts the question. In a similar way, System 1 generates context without you knowing. Reading each of the following may seem fairly simple. A, B, C, Anne approached the bank, and 12, 13, 14. But your brain actually interpreted these ambiguous statements without you ever knowing. You could have read it as A, 13C, or 12, B, 14, but your brain created the context unconsciously. Also, you likely imagined a woman with money on her mind walking towards a building with tellers. But if the sentence before this was, they were floating gently down the river, the entire scene would have changed because bank is no longer associated with money. Without an explicit context, System 1 quickly generates one based on previous experience. In this case, you've likely visited more banks than rivers, and so the context is resolved accordingly. This ties into a concept called priming. For example, if I said wash, how would you complete this word fragment? Most would see soap, but had I just shown you the word eat, you'd be more likely to see soup. In this way, both eat and wash prime your thoughts. Though System 2 likes to think that it's in charge and knows what's going on, the truth is that priming effects have even been shown to affect and modify behavior. These arise in System 1, and you have no conscious access to them.
So that was a bit of a roller coaster through the thinking about System 1 and System 2 as fast thinking and slow thinking. But the point those ideas about how we can get trapped in fast thinking, I think, are really important because I could recognize it in myself when I was trying to work with these people that I didn't know and seemed to be all over the place. My System 1, my fast thinking was saying, you've got nothing in common with these people. There's nothing to work on together. It's going to be too hard. Step away. And of course, that's the danger with things like the partnerships, with the things like working together in the partnerships. And on the face of it, it might be difficult to see how you could work together effectively, how there is something in common that you've got there. I know that other partnerships and other existing clusters and relationships have been really effective. But when we fall for that fast thinking, You know, that idea about the question about the bat and the ball. You know, there's a bat and a ball, and the whole thing costs $1.10, and the bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? And you can't help it, I can't help it. 10 cents rushes into my mind. It's 10 cents, it's got to be 10 cents. And then when you stop and think, oh, if it's $1 more, then, you know, you calculate it, then the ball costs 5 cents. There's two answers. There's at least two answers to that question. And there's the first answer that's going to come rush into my mind. And then there's the second answer that's going to take time to come. And if I go with that first answer, that impulsive answer, you know, it raises, I'm trying to get it so that it raises for me my own red flags where I'm saying, I'm not using my stop and think skills. I'm not doing what I always say is important in terms of capturing that strategic outcome. I'm just responding in the moment. And so what we see is that fast thinking works well in simple systems. When things are simple, and there's a way of doing things, well, there's a way of doing it. And so we want fast thinking. You know, as I always say, and if you've heard me talk before, you will have definitely heard me say this, we want our kids to, when we say to them, what's 3 multiplied by 5, we want them to be able to think 15 without thinking. We want it to rush forwards in their heads without thinking. We don't want them to go, what's 3 multiplied by 5? 15. Tick. That's not empowering. They've got to be able to have that fast thinking for that simple system. But where the fast thinking falls down is as soon as we get anything that's complicated, as soon as we get anything that's complex, thinking that simple thinking is going to get us through it, of course it doesn't. And when we think about it in that way, one of the things that that makes me reflect on this data, again, that you may have seen me talk about, but I want to think about it in a different way. From the OECD, so from Dirk van Dam, who's the head of education at the OECD. And these 2 particular slides that I've talked about before, in terms of the skills and pedagogy, that shift from the industrial model of education to the post-industrial model of education. If you look on that left-hand side at the industrial, the routine skills, the curriculum-centered, know this, almost a kind of syllabus-centered model of education. These are things you've got to know. The linear concepts of learning. Our kids have got to learn this before they can learn this, before they can learn this, before they can learn this. That they've got to be able to remember information before they can create information or adapt information. That we've got to tell them all this stuff before they can become problem solvers. Those sorts of linear concepts of learning are really all now the outcomes of fast thinking. Either, you know, this is the way that we've done it in the past, or you know, this is obviously the way to do it. You know, if I know something, I need the kids to understand it, I'll just tell them. That fast thinking, of course, doesn't get us into this post-industrial model of education where we are thinking about the non-linearity, where we're thinking about non-routine skills, where we're thinking about how do I help my students be able to move the knowledge and understanding, you know, whether it be the piece of string that we were talking about this morning, or it be other aspects of the learning, to shift it across all of the learning so that it is empowering. But the slide that I wanted to focus on was Dirk van Dam's slide about the way that we organise education. And again, that industrial provision of education, that focus on educational provision, that focus on a bureaucratic control, that the way that the system operates is from the top down, and so we put the capacity at the top. That thinking about there's a confined space and time. Learning only takes place within these walls, within the times of lessons and those sorts of things. That's okay for thinking fast. If you're going to do thinking fast, if there's an obvious way of doing it, if there's one way of doing it, if there's such a thing as the way of constructing a school and constructing learning and constructing a teaching and learning process, then it only exists in the industrial model. If we think about the post-industrial model, thinking fast doesn't work for us. We need thinking slow. We need to do that stop and think. We need to get below that surface, because thinking about how we're going to use that locally devolved responsibility, how we're going to use that horizontal accountability, and how we're going to make sure that we've got real authentic capacity at the point of delivery, those things take slow thinking. It's not obvious how you're going to achieve that. There's not one way of doing that. There are multiple ways of achieving that. And so it really strikes me that one of the things that we were seeing in our work with the students is also similar to the thinking that we need to be doing at that kind of systems level, the thinking that we need to be doing in terms of educational leadership, because that fast thinking that we know is no good for the students beyond the very simplest of systems is no good for us beyond the very simplest of systems as well.